Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Leading Change. I love her so much that I've brought Lisa back again. But for those that don't know you, Lisa, can you give everybody an introduction?
Well, first of all, how could anyone not know us when we're always bantering back and forth in LinkedIn, Emma? And every time we talk, we're like, we should take that to another podcast. No, so thank you for having me here. Lisa Wardlaw, coming to you live today. I'm actually at home in Atlanta, Georgia, although usually, all jokes aside, you can usually find me in a Delta lounge somewhere flying around the world for all these amazing insurtech events. I've been in insurance for 27 years. Hailing from, I guess, started my career at PricewaterhouseCoopers as an accountant, auditor, and systems transformation person in insurance. I then went to corporate, so anchoring roles at ING Voya, Munich Re, Farmers, Zurich. And then I spent the last 3 years actually working in insurtech. And notably, now I support insurtechs, and I also support and run North America for Insurtech Israel. Background, Emma, for those who don't know me, I grew up on the kind of accounting side, became a CFO, then became a chief operating officer, then pivoted into digital strategy and transformation. So super excited to be here today.
I just want everybody to take a second or a moment of silence and soak in that resume for a second before we dive in, because I think it's the perfect lead into the conversation that we're going to have today. So this is my last episode of Leading Change in March, which is Women's History Month. And for those of you that didn't recognize the pattern, every interview I did this month was with a female founder. And we also had the live stream from the Women's Walk last week. And so that's kind of going to be a little bit of the central theme for our conversation. So a couple of weeks ago, maybe a month or so ago, you had a post on LinkedIn that we both interacted back and forth with, but it got a lot of traction. And it was about the idea of being a little too much and hearing somebody use the term she's a bit too much.
Yeah.
So I want to talk a little bit about, what do you think about that term, and how have you reframed that into being a compliment?
Well, I mean, so first of all, thank you. Secondly, I never expected it to get that much traction. When I posted it, I told somebody yesterday that I never write anything for LinkedIn I don't think about the wider audience. I'm usually thinking about it as a reflection or something almost like a journal, like something that I witnessed or experienced and that I just want to kind of put it out there. And so when I start receiving the feedback, I'm like, oh yeah. But I think one thing that is telling to me about that, it was bi-directional, really. The first thing is that someone would say that someone's a bit too much. I mean, how we should be approaching diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, right? Adding the B for belonging, is not making anyone feel like, no matter how they are, that they don't have a place. So just the fact that we normalize what is, air quote, too much, by definition means we're being exclusive, and by definition means we're applying judgment on people. But I think the really even more telling thing about that is the other direction of that is that people are comfortable sitting in a room and allowing that to be said, Emma. So where they're allowing us to project those filters, those norms on, and we're perpetuating people feeling like they don't belong, people feeling like they have to condition themselves and train themselves to be different. There was one founder, actually, that's female, that said she learned how to do voice modification so that she could, change her voice to, receive better investments and better attention and things like that. And by the way, I'm in no way, shape, or form saying that people don't strive to continually improve themselves and change and have constructive ways that they, build muscle and differentiate, their style. But I think telling somebody that they're a bit too much, by definition, means that you have said your personality, your way of doing something isn't something that, fits in my norm. And when it comes to that line, whether it's being said about me or about someone else, I draw the line there. That is, by all definition, you've crossed the line. And just to give credit where credit's due, the poem about being a bit too much was actually written a while back ago, and I quoted it in my LinkedIn post. And it was about embracing who we are, not taking that, back maybe in my earlier days working in my career when I was in my 20s, not taking that into the bathroom, shutting the door, crying, composing yourself, and then, like sucking it back up and going back out there. I think there's a new way we deal with that, which is it might be a bit too much, but it's exactly what it needs to be. And I'll pause there, Emma.
So I want to, and when we were talking about this, because we got on the phone and we were talking about this post specifically and this idea, and I commented on your post, like, I'm 1,000% too much. Like, I can't even just say I'm 100% too much, because like that doesn't quite fit. I'm loud, and I always will be, and I've always talked too much, but I've also learned over time that that's who I am, and that's what makes me unique. And so we were talking a little bit about your journey of kind of reframing this idea and some of the things that you've heard that have helped you reframe that over time. So can you talk a little bit about the idea of maybe reframing to being a catalyst as opposed to being too much?
Yeah. So I think that specifically, first of all, it's really, really, really important. And I've seen so many amazing posts this month because it's Women's Month in March. So I'm trying to layer in all the, I think we're all kind of hitting on similar themes. And so this theme that I would like to hit on here is, first of all, know yourself and really know who you are. So I love the fact that you just said, Emma, I'm loud and I have this 1000% to me, not 100%, 1000%, but that makes me this. And so reframing this for me was really understanding who I am and why I am that way. So first of all, know thyself. And then secondly, make sure that you unapologetically, which is the important part here, being a bit too much, unapologetically show up as who you are. Because who you are is, by definition, your unique superpower. It gives you and gives us all that specialness that we need. If we were all the same and we all did everything the same way, homogeneity would rule and we would never have that differentiating unique factor. And I believe fundamentally that we were created differently for a reason. And so when I was discovering this, and maybe back in my 30s, I didn't really have a way to frame it. And I'm going to get to the catalyst section in a moment, Emma. Back in my 30s, I might say things like, well, I remember this. I had a coach, and the coach was trying to get me to play the game of, I was like, you want me to play tennis the way everybody plays tennis, but what if I'm just really good at the serve? And my superpower should just be acing the serve and learning how to put more spin on it. Why would I really learn the volley? And of course, everyone has to volley to a certain degree, but why would I try to master the volley was what and I didn't realize it at the time, but what I was basically asking my coach is, why are you trying to condition me to play the game the way everybody else plays the game? Why aren't you identifying my superpower and then making sure that I know how to do the foundation of the game, but really really, really, really train my superpower? And so then fast forward about 15 years and I discovered this amazing group, Shannon Lucas and Tracy Lovejoy, and it's called the Catalyst Constellations. And I went through this at the time, I think it was a 6 or 8 week program. Don't quote me on it. But it was if you're a catalyst, and what that means is, you're somebody who recognizes patterns that other people don't see. You manifest into action at I'll call it a CPU, high processing speed. And when I started taking this course, I was like, oh, I never really realized it, but I've been a catalyst. So it may have come off as being a bit too much, or maybe back in my 30s, I was trying to say I aced the serve, whatever. What it really is I have this totally different way that my brain operates and processes and thinks, which is incredibly valuable. And so and I always knew it was valuable. It's not like you don't think your way of thinking is valuable, but I had tried to condition it out of myself, when what I really needed to do was lean into, what does it mean to be a catalyst? And specifically, one of the things that I think is most interesting is how I, in particular, ended up in such a linear industry, which is very much kind of wrote mathematics, engineering, which my dad's an engineer. But what our industry really needs are people who see patterns that other people don't see and have the credibility and the ability and credibility to connect those patterns to the traditional institutional framework and then draw this vision, this catalyzed vision, paint the picture so that other people can see it so that they can morph into that. And I guess I would say here, Emma, is that probably, took me 45 years of my life to start to realize this. My mom was a dancer, and what dancers are really, people don't think this probably. People think of it as being very artsy. Yes, it's artistic. But what my mom really spent most of her time doing, she had a vision that most people didn't see, right? That's what the art of creating, art, of creating movement, of creating experiences. If we just break it down to that, it's like you have this vision of what you want someone to experience. And then you're able, it's actually quite, then that's where the organization and the linear nature kicks in. You actually have to then orchestrate all these moving pieces and parts to come together to actually realize that experience for the participants in that environment. And so if I had to kind of connect the dots there, that to me is exactly what a catalyst does. And so I was able to reframe that from being a bit too much to being exactly what was needed to be a catalyst into things like digital strategy and in innovation, and really, Emma, not only seeing patterns in a linear industry that maybe people don't see, but being able to paint that picture and that vision of what is that pattern. And then it kind of allows people's brains to then say, oh, okay, now I have something to correlate to. And that's another thing, in this catalyst discussion, we learn a lot about mental models and pictures that we have to paint for people that don't kind of naturally see the things that we're seeing, because we also have the ability to kind of only be a bit too much, but kind of sometimes unintentionally leave people behind because of the way the manifestation works so quickly. So again, if you combine all those things, it's a mouthful, but it's really, how do you take what's innate and your superpower, whatever that is? We all have amazingly different superpowers. And then how do you, I would say, master that superpower and then apply that superpower to being a differentiator? Obviously for me, it's in insurance.
So I want to dive into that idea of being, and maybe segue away a little bit from this idea of too much and dive in before we end our time together in that idea of seeing patterns in a linear industry and why leaning into that is so important, especially as we look at evolving and innovation within the space of insurance.
Yeah. So there's all sorts of levels of innovation. And so I'm not subscribing that incremental improvement or process digitization or anything like that isn't needed. But I would definitely say that, in my opinion, we do a lot of that. And we have a lot of people that are probably very, very, very astute at making something incrementally better, whether that's through digital, whether that's through automation, whether that's through process reengineering, leverage target operating models, different resource models, different technology programs. That is, I would say, maybe if we use Peter Thiel's book, that would be what he would call as one to N. You take something that's one and you make it better. What we need is a lot more of 0 to 1. How do we actually create something that's net new? And I don't mean clearly insurance as a concept isn't going to be net new. So honoring a promise, as taking something that's intangible and honoring a promise is going to be like a cornerstone of what we do. But we haven't, in my mind, done enough of what's really net new for our industry, and how do we keep customers, instead of this idea of things that people need, creating things that people want in an industry that people want, not because they have to have it, but because they want to have it. And in that vein, Emma, I see very little focus on, or not focus. I just don't think people know how to see these patterns because our industry is so linear. So what we are really good at is seeing the incremental part of it.
As is always the case, Lisa, we could keep going forever and ever, I think. And the fact that you opened this conversation by saying half the time that we're interacting with one another, we talk about how it could be another podcast. It's probably enough of a.
We can have it like at least a monthly feature, right, Emma? You know what? We should have you on the Inquiry with me and Sabine, because Sabine and I do this LinkedIn Live like every 2 weeks, which is fun because we just get to get it out there.
You let me know the time and the place and I'll be there. And we were already talking about our next collaboration before we started hitting record. So stay tuned, everybody. There's more to come. But with that said, thank you, Lisa, for spending some time with me today and sharing your thoughts on this, especially as, again, we're kind of closing out the month. While I think these conversations are important all the time, I think we get a special focus on them in March. And so I wanted to make sure that we had some time to team up on sharing a little bit of how you've helped reframe some of these ideas in your mind and are helping inspire other people to do the same. Yeah. So thank you for joining me. And thank you, everybody, for watching. And make sure, if you're not already, to go follow Lisa. And have a wonderful day, everyone.
Thanks, Emma.
Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of Leading Change. If you liked what you saw, be sure to subscribe and come back weekly for more expert interviews on digital transformation, change management, and emerging technologies.